You're not on this committee.
Governors, for our new governors, a couple of weeks, when I became chair, I started a little tradition of giving a book to the Board of Governors members. It's something that from my prior life we used to do. And so the book, well, most people can hear me.
Still can't hear you.
So the book I chose this time. Last time I think I gave a book on higher education. Before that, a book on the George Washington biography. This book, Swerve, won the Pulitzer Prize this year and was the National Book Award winner. And it's a tough book, but it's short, so don't get discouraged. And it's about the it's an important book that was written by a Yale professor, and so enjoy it over the summer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minoka, I want to call the meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee to order. Minoka, would you please call the roll?
Chair Perez.
I'm present.
Governor Coots.
Present.
Governor Beard. Governor Olson.
Here?
Governor Parker.
She's here.
Governor Rude.
He's on the phone.
Governor Temple. Here. Governor Tripp.
Here.
Governor Watley.
Here.
Chair Perez, you have a quorum.
Yeah, once I live here, I've
Wonderful. Thank you, Minoka. Good morning.
done everything I can.
We have an hour and a half for this meeting this morning. And it's actually my goal to try to get us through this process in an hour and a half. So I want to thank all of the members for being with us this morning. As you no doubt know, we have a full agenda ahead of us, and we're going to need to take action on several items today in addition to the tuition differential dollars that we're talking about. We've fortunately had 2 days of work planned, and everybody sat very attentively through the process. And we've had time to ask university presidents questions and kind of feel out our own respective concerns over some of the issues we're going to be discussing. So it's my hope that when we go through this process, it'll be a conversation about where we want to go, what we want to do. I am not going to ask, unless I get a strong inclination from the committee otherwise, I'm not going to ask university presidents or teams to make any additional presentations over what they did in the last 2 days. However, when we are considering the tuition differential increase, we'll ask each respective university to sit at the table with us and be available to answer any questions we may have. Does anyone have any challenges or issues with that process? Terrific. Before we get started, I also want to let you know that during the full board meeting this afternoon, we're going to have 2 regulations that are up for final approval. We amended those 2 regulations during our April 17th board meeting on the conference call. The amended regulations were noticed and there was no public comment received. They will be on the agenda for final approval this afternoon or whenever the board meeting occurs, maybe later tonight. At this time, I'd like to take a motion to approve the March 12, 2012 committee meetings, which were distributed in your packets. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And the motion carries 2-1. We're going to need to be voting today. I just want to be clear about that. Okay, there's also a topic that we need to talk about and get on the table before we get into the other conversations today. Back in March, I know many of you recall, we took action on several university fee proposals. We've scheduled the calendar that way because we thought it would assist the universities in knowing what their fees were going to be at the March meeting or at the February meeting, typically coming into the fall semester. But at that meeting, we discussed strengthening our regulations so that we can provide the universities additional guidance as they consider new fees. As many of you who were here know, we went back and forth over what's an appropriate fee, what is not an appropriate fee, and the committee talked then about providing clearer guidance as to what we were looking for and what we thought the statute involved. In your packet, on page 351, there are some proposed changes to the new fee section. of Regulation 7.003, and I want to share those with you fairly quickly. The thought would be that we're going to discuss these briefly here today, if you want to, kind of get a sense of direction from this committee, and then I'm going to ask Tim Jones and our staff to work on these during the summer semester so that we can bring formal changes to those regulations back to committee at the September meeting. There's three primary suggested changes in those fee regulations. The first is a change as to when we consider those new fee proposals. The original language that we drafted when this process began after we received legislative authority to implement new fees had us reviewing those fees in February. As I said, we had talked to the universities, we tried to look at our own work schedule, the university's planning processes, and we felt that February was the right time to consider those fees. One of the disadvantages of considering new fee requests in February is that in February we don't know what the overall changes to tuition and other fees will be until the end of the legislative session, which is typically May. So that would typically put us at a disadvantage when looking at the total fiscal impact of new fee proposal on our students. The proposed change that we're considering, and again, certainly open for input, is to have our committee consider new fees at our June meeting, at this meeting, at the same time we consider tuition differential. I know it's going to make for a long meeting, but there we're going to at least understand all of the impact that we'd be imposing upon students on an annual basis or a change on an annual basis, and we could have the universities still get a sense of what their fall numbers are going to look like. Again, we set the original date for these considerations of new fees in February pretty much at the request of the universities so they could plan and move forward. And before even hearing from committee, I would be curious from some of the universities if a June date on new fees makes it impossible to implement in a fall semester, or is it workable if you know coming out of the June board meeting that you've got whatever that green fee or technology fee or whatever it is approved. Are there any thoughts there? And again, we don't have to have a large dialogue about this. If you just get back to staff and let them know your thoughts. Yes, Madam Ex-Chair.
Tico, I would, if there's any immediate feedback, I would be kind of interested. I mean, I know you were kind of looking forward and it didn't seem like you were getting any responses, so you were kind of going forward. But if you didn't mind, I thought maybe Dr. Genschap is thinking about it, and if we can kind of have some idea, I think we could, that'd be good for us.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was asking or suggesting to the chair that if we could just have a little dialogue about the timing, that would be helpful, as opposed to just waiting until the university spoke, with staff. If they could just kind of give us a sense of whether that would be helpful or not, that would help me as a member of the committee. So do you guys have any comments on the timing as suggested by the chairman? Just anybody.
Just one comment. I think it's doable, but if, for instance, you had a fee that was going to fund a service where you had to add staff, you would have a very short period to actually know that you could fill an empty position. It might be done, but if it's a professional position, from June to August is a pretty short interval to actually get somebody hired and on board.
Gotcha.
The other aspect to this is the parents always say to us, the more time that we have to plan, the better. If we know the kind of rates that are going to be coming up, it helps us plan our financial status. So.
Okay. So, but there would not be an impact in getting the word out and getting invoices out and being able to, because you'll do that for the new tuition and semester anyway.
We could charge it. It's a question of whether you could
Staff around
to
it.
it if you had to do that. And the parents, they will have an interest in it. The sooner we can let them know, the better.
Okay.
But
And
I
again,
think it's doable.
we're bringing this forward now because I think at the February meeting there was some frustration not understanding what the total financial impact is going to be on an annual basis to students, not knowing what tuition and other fees may be. So the thought was it gave us more certainty in considering everything globally. But again, February is a much better time on our board calendar and for some reasons more efficient for the university. So I think if we have any input on that idea, if we have any thoughts, particularly universities or CAOs, if you've got ideas and thoughts, please provide those to staff so that we can get through them over the summer. Okay. Second issue, also the next change that is in the statute, in the regulations, is that we've strengthened the language in paragraph H that tries to state very clearly that a new fee should support a new service or activity, hopefully get us away from those duplications of services that are currently supported by E&G. We constantly get fees that are already supported by E&G. We've constantly sent the message that that's not what we believe or what we believe the legislature intended those fees to be for. So this regulation just tightens that up. And third, we've added parent I that gets directly to the supplanting issue. Again, we've been fairly clear over the last 2 years that new fees are not intended to supplant old fees, and you can't put this fee in and lower the other fee so you can get more bonding capacity on the other fee. And so these aren't supplanting fees, these are new issues, and we tried to clarify that a little bit in parent I. So I would ask the committee and certainly the universities and staffs to take a look at these fee regulations. We're putting them out there now in draft form. We'll work on them through the summer and hopefully bring them back for final consideration at our next meeting. Any questions or thoughts in that capacity? Okay, seeing none, let's go ahead and move into consideration of the university's 2012 capital improvement fee increase requests. We have 10 universities who have requested an increase in their capital improvement fee, and we heard about their reasons for those requests, and we got to highlight into some of their projects during their presentations, so we won't repeat those. But I do have a few slides I want to share with you fairly quickly, and I want to be very clear. This committee approves the fee request. We do not, under the statute, approve the projects. Those projects will not come before us for approval. So as we look at this, we ask the universities to give us a sense of what their students were looking for with their capital improvement dollars, and that's why we're getting some project ideas, and we heard them, but it is only on us to improve the fee request, and the $2 number that most of the universities have requested is a $2 per credit hour increase. So if you're a 15-hour student in fall, it's a $30 fee increase, and these were all passed unanimously by their students as well as their board of trustees, except for FAMU. There was one nay, and FSU is not looking for a fee increase at all.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Vice Chairman?
Passed unanimously by the students.
It was passed unanimously by the boards of trustees in the student member voting with that board. So let me just take a quick scan through so you'll have a sense of where we are. The capital improvement fee was established by statute back in 1982 at $3.76 per credit hour. The statute increased the fee to $4.76 in '88. The board and the state university system have had on our legislative agenda for the last 6 years, 5 out of the last 6 years, the desire to increase that fee. It has not gone up in 20 years. New statutory fee caps now cap the fee at 10% of tuition, but with no more than a $2 per credit hour increase per year. Past projects, and you see them all over our campuses, a lot of these are what the students want, and frankly, a lot of these are the selling points to students to come to a particular university. They include student unions, wellness centers, recreational facilities. It can also be used to fund real estate property acquisitions. Revenue is collected by the university, submitted to the state. Universities submit proposed projects to the board for consideration, not approval, and the board requests legislative authority for those projects. I've got slides for each of the universities. We talked about them in their requests yesterday and the day before, so I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. If you have any questions or issues, please let me know, and then my goal, if everyone is acceptable to that goal, is at the end of the presentation, if everyone agrees with the capital improvement fee increase, to just handle these in one motion, approving the requested fee amounts, which would be $2 for every university other than FSU and New College, and New College has requested $1.38. So let me run.
Has FSU requested nothing, or?
FSU requested nothing, yes. So let me run through these fees. You can get a concept. UCF has requested a $2 fee per credit hour. FIU, the same thing, and you get a sense of what they're looking at. And again, these are student monies, student fees being bonded to create projects for student quality of life enhancement. Many of these went through capital improvement fee committees where students were involved in the process and selecting the projects, as we heard. There's UWF, there's the University of Florida. USF, FAU. So that's, in general, what we heard at the initial presentations over the last 2 days. And at this time, I would be open to a motion to approve the capital improvement fee request increases as requested by the respective universities.
So moved.
Got a motion?
Second.
And a second. Is there any discussion?
Yes,
Vice Chair Coons.
thank you. As we went through these, they all look like great projects. It seemed like when it was asked, what if we had to defer some of these, that there was a fairly, pretty much agreement that these are important, they have the support of the students, but that it would, if we had to do something less, we could prioritize them, and it seemed like those priorities seemed reasonable to me. So here we have everybody going, of course, for the maximum, a 40-something% increase from where we are. And I realize that we haven't increased these in a long time, so I think it's reasonable to increase. For me, I think it's probably, I'm not supportive of the full increase. I would be more interested in a reduction from the full increase and having the universities each prioritize the projects and see if we can't defer some of this for another year, because it sounded like it was possible and it would be a slightly less increase in fee.
Other comments?
Well, first of all, we're not going to deal with any of these projects.
No, I know.
I get one off. So
I just would have had the pool of money be
yeah,
somewhat smaller, and then they would prioritize it themselves.
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Ex-Chair.
It's going to be a long day. I can feel it already. I think it'd be helpful if, since this is the first time we're kind of talking about this for some of our newer members, if I don't know if our student member has any thoughts, or if you can kind of shed some light on how your colleagues may feel about this issue, that may be helpful.
Yes, I was going to comment. I think that when looking at the CITFE, that these are projects that students are going to directly benefit from, and that's why in the composition of the committees, it's a student majority, and we have direct say in the projects that we want to bring to campus. I understand the concern for the decrease, but also it's a matter of the expected yield that the disbursement is supposed to bring into the institutions, and I think that's the reason that you saw a lot of the institutions looking for the maximum that the fee could produce. In addition to the fact that, like you said, it hasn't been increased since 1989. A lot of these schools are looking for disbursements, and a lot of these students are looking for these facilities and these projects that are going to enrich and enhance their educational experience. So, and I think that this is just the time that the institutions are looking to actually make that move. So I'm in, like I voted for my own. I've talked to the other student body presidents as well that represent their individual institutions, which are obviously very supportive of the maximum fee increase. And I think if you see any hesitation from the student body presidents that represent those institutions, I would be more concerned with the levels that the fees are at. But since I didn't see any reservation from the student body presidents, nor myself, I feel comfortable with approving them as a block and approving them as requested by the universities.
Thank you, Governor Wadley. Any other thoughts or issues? If not, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion to accept the recommendations or the requests of the universities to raise capital improvement fees as requested and set forth in our packages and their work plans, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed?
No.
Okay, motion carries. Governor Beard, you've got a facilities task force committee that you've brought together, and I think this is a decent time to have at least you give us an update on what's going on with your task force and reviews.
Well, actually, we're going to have a presentation by President Bentz at the Facilities Task Force meeting, which will totally bring the board up to snuff. So I'd like to defer it, but let me just say that we've had several meetings. We are starting to dig into the real meat of ways to find alternatives to our current PICO fund problem, and we do have a crisis in funding facilities, and as you've heard, we can't grow this system if we can't have facilities to put people in. And it was kind of interesting. We had a meeting this morning with some of the professors at UCF, and I asked one of the real high researchers what brought him to Florida, and he basically said, I came because UCF had moved me from 1,000 square foot office in Alabama that I was in, but I got 5,000 feet here that I could handle all my researchers in. So, facilities are important to our research process, and it's extremely important to our growth. And so, President Bentz, I look forward to your report when we get there.
I'll be happy to.
Yeah.
Thank you, Governor Beard. Thank you, President Bentz, for your service on that task force. I know that is a task. I think it's properly named. I'm confident it is. Okay, at this point, we're going to go ahead and move into our consideration of university tuition differential fee increases. As most of you know, we have 8 universities requesting a 15% differential tuition increase, 1 university requesting 14%, 1 requesting 11%, and 1 requesting 9%. We heard about the reasons for their tuition increases during our discussions over the last 2 days. So as I said, we're not going to repeat presentations this morning. I think everybody was here, and I think we all have a sense of what the universities are doing and what they're dealing with. I also want to remind the committee that in your packet, you've got the 4-year tuition and fee projections that were prepared by each university. You can not only see what they're planning for the next 4 years, but you can also take a look back and see what the tuition and fee increases have been for the last 3 years, and I'll talk about those a bit in my presentation. It sort of gives us a good overall impact view of where we've been, where we're going, and frankly what our students and our families can expect. Also in your package, it's on page 387, is a summary of various metrics that our regulation states that this committee must consider when reviewing differential tuition increases. That summary in the package is going to provide us with basic information on graduation rates, course selections, percent of undergraduates taught by faculty, average salary and benefits of faculty, student-faculty ratios, licensure pass rates, and on and on. Particularly, it gives us information on students receiving financial aid rewards. We've also prepared a slide for each university that kind of summarizes that, and we'll have that on the screen while we're considering each university. What I want to do now is quickly run through PowerPoint, particularly for some of our new members, sort of give you a sense of where we've been and what's been going on in the system. As you can see in slide 1, even with 15% tuition increases, our total E&G appropriation is less today than it was in 2007, 2008. Now, let me apologize in advance. They gave me a laser pointer. I think they're really cool. So I'm going to be using this a lot, okay? But
Yeah, right.
Will you point at us at all?
I will not, that's right.
Blind us?
I may have to.
The penalty for disagreeing is blind.
There you go, it's blindness.
Keep feeling it right here on
There, huh? I bet I'm not the only one in the room thinking that way. Okay.
You want us to back up a little?
And if I could get a shot at Trip, I would. All right. Let's be clear. The state component is in black. I think we are. The state component is in black.
I have my bulletproof vest on today.
The tuition component is in blue. And this orange component that you see in these were when there were federal stimulus. So as you can see, there is still a steady trend year over year, the reduction of E&G funding and the making up of that funding with tuition dollars. The columns make it very clear that particularly this year, and it's an important flip, assuming we approve the 15% requests or the requests that have been asked of us, you will see that for the first time, I think in history, this tuition will pay more than 50% of the cost of education. That is a flip in the process. Now, the legislature has assured us, or at least when they took the $300 million reduction, that was a one-time reduction and that money would move back into base next year. We hope they will certainly do that. The next slide gives us our E&G funding per FTE student. Students are, as I said, contributing a larger portion. Here is where you see the crossover. That is in this year. But more importantly, it's the trend lines. You see the state number is continually gone down, while the blue line is tuition, and even the total line has gone down from a 13,124 number to a 10,117 per FTE, even when you combine state and tuition funding. So that is about a $3,000 per student FTE drop over the last 5 years. I think you're going to see, as I move through the slides, that the universities have made that work. They have focused on some extraordinary efficiencies, and they're trying to do, well, at first they tried to do more with less. Now, as we heard over the last few days, I'm afraid they're doing less with less. And I think that's the trend as we move forward.
Tico, could I comment real quick on that last one?
Absolutely, Mr. President.
And I think it's a little rough, but I think if you took the state support in 07 and 08 and simply adjusted it for inflation, you probably could do away with tuition altogether and still get the same number of total spending. It just shows you how much that's dropped over time. And again, the 10,100 is still too low, but it's kind of an incredible contrast.
Tico?
Yes, Governor Tripp.
Can you point out that that does not include the fees that students pay?
Yes.
Do we have that number?
It's coming in later slides. We've got total package numbers as well. But that will certainly take the number well over, Norm. Obviously, if we add student fees to the blue line, it would continue to go up. But these are the tuition dollars that we're talking about, cost of education as opposed to the fees for the other ancillary services and health fees and activity and service fees, things of that nature. The next slide talks about some of the E&G reductions compared to tuition increase. One of the interesting things about differential tuition, there are restrictions on its use. And I think we heard in some of the presentations how differential tuition has got to be used. Most important of which, at least from my perspective, is 30% of that tuition must be used for need-based financial aid. And we see that number here, that in this year's request, we'd be looking at about $37 million. If everyone gets everything they asked for, that would add another $37 million to the need-based financial aid number. So the composition this year would be $412 million of base tuition, and then the balance in need-based tuition getting us to, differential tuition getting us to $636 million, of which $37 million of that would then be need-based, $97 million total. So even as a university asks for a 15% tuition increase to their ability to use those funds freely as they can use tuition dollars, they're only getting 2/3 of that amount for their usage, and that's got to be used solely where the differential tuition can be used. It's not free-flowing dollars like regular tuition dollars are. This is an interesting slide because we have the conversation about accessibility, and you can see that this is the projected student enrollment in the state university system over the next 3 years. We're projected to grow by more than 20,000, and let me be clear, this does not include any enrollments in Poly. To the extent that Poly is up and running and taking students, this does not factor in any of those students in the Polytech side. So right now we're looking at, based upon the projections we've received from the universities, a 20,000 enrollment growth because, as we heard from particularly our metropolitan universities, the mission is to, as Governor Scott said, train the workforce and provide accessibility. So we're looking to grow by 20,000 over the next 3 years. I also asked, because it's important for us to get a sense of what students have available to them to help with their educational costs. I think everybody at the table and everyone in the room is very sensitive to raising tuition, increasing costs, and the burden that it puts on our families. I think, frankly, Governor Scott asked the right questions the other day at lunch. Are we doing everything we can do to maintain quality, allow accessibility, affordability, and create efficiency? I think our universities have done that. Those are the same questions we've been asking for years. But I want to make sure we understand as we move forward that students have access to financial aid from the state through Bright Futures, the federal government through Pell Grants, institutional awards, private awards, and waivers. We've heard from some of our universities that they make sure that their need-based students' needs are completely covered. And this slide, I think, is important, and I referred to it the other day. This is net tuition and fees, Norm, so it includes the fees by family income. So based upon the availability of financial aid and grants, this is not loans, this is financial aid, Pell Grant, Bright Future. If your family is below $40,000 in income, you are not incurring any cost for your education if you can get in. In fact, those funds that are available at FAMU gives you an extra $2,061, FAU $4,481. Across the line, you can see the parentheses mean they are more than covering your cost of education, and that is presuming this fee increase, this tuition increase. These numbers presume the 15%. If your family income is $40,000 to $60,000, you're kind of spotty. It depends on which university you choose to go to, but even if you go to FAM, it's going to cost right at $336. That's your gap for a family making under $60,000. Florida Gulf Coast, $588. FIU, $94 it will cost you. UCF, $862. And UNF, you're still over $1,000 ahead of the game if your family makes under $60,000. The tuition and fees impact starts to be felt here at the $60,000 to $79,000 range, but again, you're still under $1,000 in some categories, well under $2,000 in all but one. So I understand that we are talking about an increase in tuition for these universities, but because of the fact that a third of that money goes to need-based financial aid, because of the fact that our universities are very focused on providing financial aid, we are not burdening overwhelmingly those families that we talk about burdening overwhelmingly. Governor Parker, you had a question.
I do have a question, Mr. Chairman. And so this is for a semester, or this is for both fall and spring?
This is a year.
A year?
Yeah, fall and spring, 2011, 2012.
And it just takes into account the tuition and fees, not the housing and all
Not
that?
the cost of living, not the food. I mean, you've got to pretty much live and eat wherever you go. It may be a little more or a little less elsewhere. So it's not the total cost of attendance, but it is the cost of tuition and fees. So again, I think this slide is very powerful in our deliberation today because it's very easy to say we don't want to overburden the state, the federal government, and our institutions have been very focused on making sure that we have accessibility in this system. So I want to make sure we pay attention to that slide. I think it's an important slide.
Can I ask one other question?
Yes, ma'am.
Understand? Okay, like if I look at Between the 60 and the, if I take the 60 and the 80 category versus the 80 to the 100, I guess it surprises me that, like, if I consider FAMU, I don't quite understand why it would be 937 for the 60 to 80 and then go down to 393 for the 80 to 100.
It could be something with the grant systems. Each university was individually calculated by our staff. I don't know if Tim can shed any light on that. Yeah. We calculated each individual university because I wanted to make sure I knew what was available where as we move forward in this process. But it's a very fair question, Governor Parker.
So these are actual numbers, not estimates. These are actual numbers from data we collected from the university?
That is my understanding. Yep. So anyway, I think it's a telling slide. Governor Hussaini.
Mr. Chairman,
I don't think.
is there a,
This doesn't make sense.
Hang on,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Maury?
is there a data shows that how many families in Florida that have more than one kid going to college at the same time?
I don't know the answer to that. It's not in this slide deck. I'm sure there is, but each of those kids would be eligible for the same financial assistance, Maury.
Right.
If they earn Bright Futures, they'll earn Bright Futures.
But if you're at $80,000, you have to, let's say, if you go to UCF, I don't know, I'm just using this as an example.
Okay.
Let's not use UCF, let's use UF. At $80,000, you will have $2,300, am I right?
That's correct. No, at 80,000?
80,000.
1,498.
1,498. So that if you have two kids, it costs double.
Yes.
Of that money.
Yeah.
They do scale it, Maury, they do scale it based on the size of the family. So it does
Right.
adjust for that. So the bigger the family, then the more support you would get.
But, I mean, just very minute, I mean, if you're, if you have two kids going to the same college, and you have two kids, or you have three kids, I think even though it's a family, but the percentages is not really that big. I think we did like 8-9%, something like that.
Yeah, Maury, I mean, the answer is yes. It's going to cost money to
Right.
go to college.
Right.
That there is no doubt.
Right.
But again, I think a lot of folks would argue that if you've got a kid in UF, you're making $100,000 or above, $1,360 isn't too much to pay to send your student to the University of Florida for a degree, after all the awards that are available are taken up. So,
But no, that, I mean, it does cost, I agree with you. It does cost, and easy for us to say, but if you have been through 5 years of a disaster recession, and family losing their jobs, which we have we're at one point 11% job loss, and people don't have jobs to go, and that makes it pretty difficult. Or people that have to, drop on their salaries,
But,
and those numbers, every dollar for it count to them.
there is no doubt that is true.
Okay.
No doubt. Let me move through.
Yeah, and half of them do that and never graduate.
Well, and that's not half. 85% graduation rate, I think, is what University of Florida had.
Well, I didn't mean University of Florida. It's
Right.
in general, when you scan the numbers, it's...
Yeah, no, you're right. A lot of students do that, and that is their choice. I mean, that is their choice. Our issue is cost, and I only put this slide up there to make sure we had a grasp of that impact, because we hear the stories, but our universities are working very, very hard to make accessibility work in this state. We hear it all the time. We rank 45th in the state and in the nation in undergraduate tuition and fees, and I agree with the governor. I'm not ashamed of that number as long as our quality stays where it should be. The U.S. average is $8,244. Ours is $5,626 on average as a system, and then each of our universities are down below. Yes, ex-chair Parker.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. I put my head down. I just had one other question from the previous slide. Can you go back to clarify one thing? I apologize.
I think I can. Yep.
So when we say below $40,000 and we have those numbers in parens, the assumption is that that money is actually going back into the pocket of those students and they can actually use that to supplement their housing and other?
If they choose to access all the financial aid that is available to them and that contemplates Bright Futures, yes, that money would be available to them.
Is that what's actually happening?
That's actually happening.
Yes, ma'am.
I would just observe, I haven't looked at the actual data for several years, but I believe these are actual numbers at universities that the Bright Future Awards track income, family income pretty closely.
Correct.
And the higher the family income, the more Bright Future Awards that are being awarded. And so one of the reasons you may see a drop between certain income levels is because at those income levels, more people are qualifying for Bright Future Awards than on in other income levels. So that may be the answer. The data I looked at was 4 or 5 years ago, but I suspect that data is still true.
Okay.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We've talked for years about reaching the national average, and that is not an aspirational goal for any of us. However, it is a measuring tool that we need to be considering when we look at these issues. And as you can see, if ongoing trends continue where they are, if the state of Florida continues at a 15% per year increase, and the other universities continue with their 8.5, 8.6% increases, it will take 10 years for the state of Florida to reach the national average. Again, not an aspirational goal, just a measuring stick. But one of the important things we need to consider is when we look at a 8% increase at many of these universities, the net dollar impact of an 8% increase at a university on the high end of the scale is more dollars than a 15% increase in the state university system. As you can see, this chart on the national average assumes an 8.3% annual increase. So I think it's an important metric. Again, not a goal. We've never stated our desire as a board to achieve the national average, but it is an interesting measuring stick for us to understand as we move forward. And of course, these are public universities, not privates. The governor asked about efficiencies and cost savings, and we've been asking about those things for the last 5 years as we've watched these trends continue. Some of the summary issues that have been dealt with by our universities over the last 5 years, we've terminated 218 programs. We've eliminated over 100 institutes and centers. We've outsourced services, consolidated operation, co-located units. The list is there, including energy efficiencies, and we had a very lengthy meeting about it last year. We're going to have a very lengthy meeting in September on the cost savings and efficiencies. We've been at this for many years. This is not a new thing for our universities. And the thought that we are continuing to educate more and more students with less and less money and still get the only A rating in efficiency in the nation yesterday, as was reported, says a lot about the work that our universities are doing. We have a lot to be proud of there. A history of increases, just so we are all aware. In 2007, 2008, there was a base increase of 5% by the legislature and nothing by the Board of Governors. We didn't have differential tuition authority. 0809, some universities had differential tuition authority. After that, everybody got it, and you can see that it's been 15% at all universities from 9, 10, 10, 11, 11, 12. The last time there was no tuition increase in the state of Florida was 1995, 1996.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Governor Mercedes.
So that means that if you start just from 2008 and 9, from 2009, if we give them 15% today, that means we have a 74% increase in tuition. While we were going through this recession as we've been going through.
I think that's correct, Governor Hussaini, and I can go back to the other slide, and you would see the corresponding reductions in general revenue. It's not as if the universities are piling money up because they've got the overages. The universities have...
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. I am absolutely not suggesting that. all I'm suggesting that is that parents,
Certainly.
parents of the family that have lost their jobs. I lost 2/3 of my employees. 2/3 of my employees I have lost in the last 5-6 years. If you think anybody understands what it is to go through and cut costs, I totally understand. Mr. Delaney brought up about moving your trash. I really enjoyed hearing that, because not only we had to do that, they had to take it to the outside and put it in a big pile. I mean, we had to cut. We had to cut divisions. We had to cut. I had my corporate office. I had to rent. My 3rd and 4th floor, or 2nd, 3rd floor. So we all had to do that. Today, it's not about. And you have put this up, Mr. Chairman. Really, this is really a telling. Today, it's not about is that if the universities are doing anything wrong. Today is about a family that has been going through a recession, and we have continuously been beating on them and giving them a 15% increase. And if you pass a 15% today, you are giving them, this is 74% increase in tuition while we've been going through this tremendous recession. I think our family needs a break.
And let me, I know we want to have this dialogue. Let me finish my slides.
No, I mean because that was a very telling slide.
Mr. Chairman, I
if we're
think
gonna
since
go-
the dialogue started, I would like us to be able to have just some comment here, if you would allow that.
At your leisure, Governor.
And I think Mr. Rood wanted to speak before I did.
Well, my question was, are we going to debate every slide? And if we are, I'll talk about my experience in cost cutting and my opinion on this, or we can wait till the end. I'd like you, Chairman, to let us know how you would like us to proceed.
I've got about 5 slides left, and I'd love to get through them.
I would like
Governor
to
Tripp,
make a comment, if I could.
Please.
The state of Florida, and like the country, families have lost 40% of their net worth. I would suspect in Florida that number is probably even higher. What I find very interesting is in the last legislative session, the elected officials came to the conclusion that the state of Florida had no wherewithal to be able to spend any money on higher education. If they didn't feel the state and its population were in a position to spend money on higher education, why would this board suspect that those same people that we're talking about who have the children who are trying to live in this state have the ability to pay any more increase? I'm just flustered by the fact that well, I understand there is a need there, but there's always a need. My former partner, Senator Jim Scott, said, it doesn't matter how much money you give an institution, they will find a way to spend it. And so I think with all the reports showing the economy is not strengthening, it's going down, that to increase the cost of an education at this point makes no sense. And if the dialogue is that as a state we need to do that, it really needs to start in the legislative session so they can tell us how much they feel it's important, put their dollars up, have that dialogue with the population, and then see whether or not we decide that we've got to go on a different path. If our path in the future is that the state is no longer going to be the main support for education and it's going to be tuition driven, then we've got to think of the long-term effects because it will affect families.
Thanks, Governor.
While I've heard many times all these conversations about how people are getting back money, when I go to Gainesville, every business is being operated by students.
So Norm,
When I go to FSU,
you're going way beyond the slide. I mean, just, because you
so
you're
I
going
mean,
to make the
I
argument
don't
about-
buy the idea that there's so much money out there that our students are flush with cash. I just don't believe it.
Great, let me move forward. Because of a couple of things, and with all due respect to your former partner, Senator Scott, who was a great guy, by the way, our universities managed over the course of the last 5 years to build, through prudent management, and we're going to talk about that now in a moment, prudent management reserves to carry them through these downturns from the legislature, and we're rewarded with having those reserves pulled in the last session as a one-time fee, and I understand the legislature is committed to replenish those next session, and we're hopeful that they are. But our universities have proven that they are managing their funds well. Let me be clear. Differential tuition is very different from regular tuition. These are, the use of those funds are only to do certain specific things. And in 2012, differential tuition, the results of those funds went to do this. If you look at the university system as a whole, 1,528 adjuncts or faculty were hired or retained, 164 advisors, and more important to me, 6,219 course selections added or saved. In President Barron's presentation, he made a very astute comment. He said, if you want to see a tuition increase, don't have courses available and make students stay a fifth year. That is a tuition increase. We keep them out of the workforce, and they've got to stay on campus. We saved 6,219 courses or sections over the last 12 months as a result of the differential tuition last year. 30,629 students received tuition differential need-based financial aid. We are on a university-by-university basis there again. When we raise differential tuition, 30% must go to need-based financial aid. And as you can see, the mean awards just from differential tuition for these students. So the universities, the system, and the legislature who put this requirement in are trying to make certain that those families that we are talking about that are most effective at least have some opportunity to continue to level out and continue to stay in our system and get done. Tuition differential per credit hour and revenue collected. The chart's a little bit busy, but as you can see where it's going, undergraduate instruction is here and need-based financial aid is there, and it's a 70-30 split. That just goes university by university, telling us exactly where that money is going. Oops, I hit my pointer instead of my slide changer. This is our dollar changes in tuition and fees. It just shows how we mirror the national average. As I said before, the national average is about a 6.6%, 8.4%, 8.3% increases, but the dollar amounts in those national averages almost mirror what our 11.9 changes are and our 12 changes are and our 15 changes are. And this is tuition and fees. So when tuition and fees go up across the other universities, they can announce an 8%. They're still getting about the same dollars that we're getting in the state of Florida. These are undergraduate tuition and fees compared to the U.S. average. Just to make the point, the SUS is 68.4% of the U.S. average in tuition and fees, Governor Tripp, and that's one of the questions that you had asked. So when you combine the both, we're at 68.4% of the U.S. average. Again, the average is not an aspirational goal. It's merely a frame of reference. This would be where we will be if we approve the 15% requested by each of the universities or those that have requested that. The green obviously being the differential added. If we approve it, the SUS would then be at 70% of the national average for cost of education for students, or at least the students' cost of education. So here's our process. Initially, I'll clear my throat. Then, we're going to consider and take action on each of the fee proposals from each of the universities. Our committee will vote. Only our committee will vote. No one not on our committee will vote. And then we will make a committee recommendation to the full board this afternoon. If the full board does not, if the board does not accept the proposal from the university, so for instance, if a university asked for 15 and the board came back and said 12, the university has the right to appeal that decision. their Board of Trustees, within 5 days, and that will be June 26th, can request reconsideration of that decision by the Board's Appeals Committee. The Appeals Committee would then meet within 10 days, on or before July 2nd. And for those of you who are curious, the Appeals Committee consists of the chairs of each of our current committees. So it's all of the committee chairs that we've seen over the last several days. With that said, I want to go ahead and begin our tuition differential process. Governor Hussaini.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for this slide. Really, it's very interesting. Oh, he's going away. I'll make a motion that...
Governor Hussaini is not
on the committee. I've just... I really appreciate not putting me on that committee. Mr. Chairman, since I have the floor, he gave me the floor. Well, he gave me the floor. I will be, only comment I will make is this, that I think this was very telling. But however, for the committee, as a board member, I will say that I want to give the family a break. And so if once it gets to the board, assuming that the 15% doesn't get passed, and I want to, compromise, trying to just kind of not caught the universities by surprise and give them nothing, because we had a huge increases. Again, I'll repeat this again, had nothing to do with the universities. It's about the people and the families trying to save their family and send their kids to the school. I am for, when we wrote it, I would leave that for the board meeting, but I will be offering later on at the board level a different proposal other than a full 15% increase. So if it doesn't get passed, that's what I'll be doing.
I'd like to make a motion.
Wait,
let's this thing started.
We're not.
I'm on the committee.
Okay.
Let's get our chair back.
Well, as the vice chair, we can make some real fast progress here. Oh, no, you're the chair.
Nico, I'd like to make a motion as a member of this committee.
He's back. He's back.
Yes.
That we approve the tuition recommendations or requests that were made by each of the individual universities. So there's a little difference. Most of them are 15%.
Second.
So there's a motion by Governor Tripp, seconded by Governor Rude.
No. Temple. You're
I'm
not
sorry.
going to get tripped.
It was Freudian. I'm sorry. Motion's like, I wanted Tripp on the record for that. No. There's a motion by Governor Temple, seconded by Governor Rude, to approve all of the university's tuition requests as requested.
Yeah, well, I think they ought to have the full 15, but if the University of Florida wants to keep their head in the sand, that's fine.
Okay.
I think
Second
it's probably
discussion.
easier if we just go with their
Okay,
request.
there's
Barring a comment that the president excused us.
Should have made it yesterday.
all right, now at this point, I'm going to have to grab the gavel and maintain control because this conversation is going to get going. So there's a motion and a second to approve each of the university's requests as requested. Governor Rude.
I have a few comments, and I'll just say it once and then I'll stay out of the debate. I really think that the governor, the legislature, and all Floridians value certain aspects of our educational system, and we've got one that we should be very proud of. They value excellence, value efficiency, and I think that's what really sets Florida apart, is how efficient our system is. And when you analyze the cost versus the results, we're one of the top in the country. We value access, and we hear that over and over again. We value STEM, and we value an education that is valuable to those that get a degree. And what does that mean? That means that we equip our students with the skills to go out and to get a job. We're not trade schools. We hopefully teach them to learn so that they can change careers as the economic climate changes. So we value all those things. I think we also would all agree that total revenues to the universities have gone down over the last 6 years. The question is, what do we think about the shift? And we're all kind of assuming this shift to a 50-50 is bad. In other words, that the students are paying more and the legislature is paying less. when my kids went to school outside of the state, and I looked at the percentage that the state was paying towards the education system, as a parent and as a taxpayer, I was shocked. And I don't think 50-50 is bad. You know, I think 50-50 is pretty generous if you take a look around the country as to what the other states are subsidizing tuition for. So we're looking at this like it's a bad thing. If we didn't have this economic crisis, I would probably be sitting here proposing that we would do a little bit different shift. We also talk about waste in government, and I'll agree, there is waste in government. Every government that I know, there's horrendous waste. And the waste gets worse, the further you get away from the people, the worse it is, and as you get down, the less it is. But there's also waste in my business. My business does not operate as efficiently as if I was on every property and operated it. So just to say there's waste and let's not fund it, I don't think is realistic. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, whenever it's been, it seems like eternity, when I came on this board, I remember just arguing against any fee increase because I would point to examples of waste, the custodians, the landscapers, and on and on. But I visited and spent a lot of time at University of Florida looking at how they spend their money. At FSU, Gulf Coast, and UNF, those 4 universities, different universities, spent a lot of time and drilled down. And yes, there is waste, but on the other hand, the waste to me is minimal, and even if we keep cutting it, we're not going to change it from not being government. We're not going to make it a private for-profit thing that may squeeze everything from operations and put it elsewhere. But I'd also say that in going through that process, I believe that the people that were in charge of the dollars for the state are very concerned about spending money as wisely as they can. They don't intentionally waste money. We put them in a position that they have to make certain decisions that may not be the decisions we would make in our businesses, but that's the decision that they have to make because of the responsibilities that they have on how they build buildings and so forth. But they are spending it wisely. And I believe as you go through these criteria that we all think are important, if we look at excellence in our system, I believe in all my heart that we are to the point in this system that if we continue to fund at the level we are now funding, the level of excellence is going down. And in 5-10 years, if we don't change something dramatically, the system that we are so proud of now will not have the same reputation around the country as it does now. And that also changes efficiency. Access, we talk about access. If we cut dollars, I'm sure all of you guys do, and once they find you're on here, you're going to get calls from parents over and over and over again screaming that we are only giving slots to out-of-state people and we're not giving them to in-state people because they make more money, or they pay more money. That's not the case. The case is we don't have enough slots. Access is a huge problem here. We cut the resources, we are cutting access. We talk about valuing STEM, and I applaud the governor's leadership on promoting STEM. But if we cut dollars, Governor Yost, he's lost out of one of the top chemistry departments in this country. He's down 30% in the number of full-time professors teaching chemistry, and he's using others. We're reducing the STEM. We all know STEM costs more. And then the value part of it. We have to teach our graduates to learn. That's so critical. We all went to college. Well, I know if we all went to college. When I went to college, hopefully I learned to learn, and that's why that's what helped me be successful. I didn't learn a trade, and the more we keep cutting, and the more we cut into that university experience, the whole university experience, having the university funded or the projects funded and supported by the students, and to try to get them to stay there, part of the university, and graduate in 4 or 5 years, which is another one of the goals that we have. If we cut those projects, it's going to make that goal even more difficult to achieve. So, Governor Hussaini, I agree with you. The people in this state are hurting, and I hate raising costs. I hate doing this. But I have to look long-term at the system, and I want a system that when I leave here, I know that I did all I could to maintain the excellence and the efficiency that we are so proud of, and that's why I'm going to vote for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we need to get to the vote, so I'll be brief. And I guess I'm a little...
Lean in a little closer.
Excuse me?
Lean in a little closer,
I'm a little disappointed that what we're going to do is have an all or nothing vote, because I actually think if that's what we end up doing, that we've missed the opportunity to have something in the middle be actually the answer, because I believe that we cannot continue every year to increase tuition 15%. We have to think of the students, and in my day job, seeing the difficulties that Floridians have had in meeting their obligations during this Great Recession has been sobering, and to see that we would be contributing to that by causing the student debt level to increase is something that I don't think we should do. And I look at the numbers, and just a couple, just kind of for the record to see what I'm looking at, is the graduation rates are too low, and they haven't moved as much as they need to move, and yet we're going to increase tuition. The progress on the key metrics, so with the exception of University of Florida, Florida Atlantic, and Florida State, who have improved significantly in almost every metric, the rest of the universities roughly are improving in about half of the metrics that we deem to be critical. And I think that it's important we hold that there needs to be accountability. So as we raise tuition to help us do a lot of things, increase graduation rates, improve the quality, then we have to measure, well, did that work? And I'm concerned that we're increasing the tuition, but the metrics don't show in every case that we're actually improving at the level we should be. The U.S. Chamber recognizes how spectacular our universities are, and they are. I think we have the ability to weather the storm, to put the pressure on the legislature, who said they're going to put this money back in our coffers, and I think that if we simply raise it 15%, they may feel like they have an out not to do that, and I think we have to hold their feet to the fire to put this money back. I think it's just disappointing to think that we will increase, to Governor Hussaini's comment, is a 74% increase in tuition over the last several years, and I think it's the wrong thing to do. So while I'll be voting no for this vote, I actually would suggest that the proper answer here is neither a yes or no vote on this motion, but that we actually try to find something in the middle so we can help the universities increase revenue while also being cognizant of the burden we place on our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Coots. Let me just clarify, because it wasn't in the slides, but in the budget from the Florida legislature last year was the $300 million cut, which was to be made up by reserves. It was a one-time cut. We were told at the time that those monies would return, and a budget projection of $90 million from a 15% across-the-board tuition increase.
I understand.
So I think the legislature has told us what they're expecting and the investment that they're looking for.
I
So
understand
just,
the facts. I
you know,
want to make sure they put the 300 back.
I'm with you, and I pray that they do. That said, I just wanted to make sure it was clear that in the number that the universities have already received, the $300 million cut, it presumes this $90 million from 15% across the board. It will be less. So whatever isn't here is even a deeper cut and more diving into those universities' reserves. I've got a list of folks. Let me go to Governor Whatley, and then we'll go to Governor Beard. And then, Governor Tripp, did you have Governor Temple, you had your hand up. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a couple of comments in general, and I think that from my position, this is probably one of the hardest decisions that I have to make because I have constituents myself that are directly affected by these decisions. But in my observation, I want to say that I understand that it is definitely unsustainable to think that shifting the burden to students, or it is unsustainable doing that. But what's even more unsustainable is thinking that these universities are going to be able to continue to perform at maximum efficiencies on a shoestring budget, with their budgets continuously being cut. And I think that the tuition, and I don't know if it's being lost in conversation, that this doesn't necessarily account for all of the funds that they are being reduced by. This is only helping to supplement those funds that they're losing. And I think, a lot of times we look at the institutions on a business model, on the business scale, and the simple fact is businesses fail. That's what happens in business. And I think the big question is, are we going to let our institutions fail? No one wants to see, or at least from my understanding, we're all very sensitive to the increase in tuition. But I don't think anyone wants to see any of these institutions fail. And from a student perspective, and especially one that's not focusing in STEM areas, it could be easily that my program gets cut, liberal arts programs, the other programs, and that's when you see students being outraged, when their programs are cut, when they're having to stay in school longer, when they're having to refocus and shift their majors. And I bet any student would be willing to pay for addition to make sure that the classes that they want to receive and the product that they are used to and the level of education that they are expecting is provided by these institutions. I think that the fact that all the student body presidents, except one, voted for some sort of increase and that their respected institutions just is very indicative of the condition of our state. And I think what is also lost in this conversation is that I agree we have to put pressure on the legislature. And I think that is the main issue, and that is the main focus. And I don't think it's punishing these universities that are trying to be as efficient as they can and have been as efficient as they can. And I think that if you really want to see some sort of change, the argument can be made that the money is not there. But I bet if you put pressure on the legislature and start to make them put pressure on their jobs, they'll be creative. That's what we're asking these institutions to do. That's what we're asking businesses to do, to tighten their budgets. If we put pressure on our respected representatives, they'll find money somewhere. They'll find some other way to be innovative to bring revenue to the state. So I think that, this is a tough decision, but in very hard times, I do feel that this is tough on the families, but we have to be pro-education and looking at the long term. And I think that this is something that the presidents have come forth with, and they really understand what's best for the institution. For me, interacting with all the student body presidents, I've actually had the opportunity. I've been to most of these institutions. I understand their demographics. I understand the areas where they're at. I've seen their facilities. I've talked to their administrators. I've talked to their students. I understand a lot about these institutions that I feel that a lot of members of this board might not understand. They do, and I think that this is the proper move, and that this motion is proper, considering that the institutions took a lot of time and a lot of effort coming to this board with their individual requests. So I will be in favor of the motion that was presented.
Thank you, Governor. Governor Beard.
Well, I wanted to walk through several points and to let you know why I think the 15% increase is necessary. First of all, this board needs to be helpful to the university system. We need to make sure that the system is better, not worse, and that access is provided to the state students. And I think if we move down a direction of not providing the resources that we won't get there. The legislature approved 15% in their legislation, and I think they expect for us to do that. The goal for the state for the last 4 or 5 years has been to move tuition to the national average, and by not continuing to move it, we won't get to that goal. And we're not even getting there by moving our tuition 15% because our numbers are so much smaller. We keep losing or not even moving at all at 15%. The issue to me is not the gross tuition increases, it's the net tuition increases. And I think there was a chart up there that showed that very, very well, that we've got the most needy students getting, they're not paying any tuition, as a matter of fact, and they're taking some money home to help with their other expenses. And I think also using this technique gives us an increase in the need-based tuition, which this state has desperately needed over the last 4 or 5 years. We've just started to get the need-based tuition moving in the right direction in this state. The system has gone through 5 years of very difficult cuts, and my sense is that we're at the point where, we're cutting to the quick. I think we're kidding ourselves if we think the legislature is going to have any money next year. I don't think they're going to replace any of this money. I don't think there's a chance of us getting any more money, and I think we're going to be having this discussion for years to come. And lastly, it really concerned me that we've got many of the institutions today talking about not increasing enrollment, and that's a direct result of not having the resources to do it, both in PICO but in tuition. So for all of those reasons, I'm going to vote for the 15% increase, and frankly, I'd like to see a motion that gives the other 3 institutions that didn't ask for it, so it's fair to all institutions that they get it also. So if that works.
Thank you, Governor Beard. Governor Temple.
Yeah, well, I'll amend my motion if you want. I'm just trying to make it easier.
Well, I understand
and
the
less
issue.
controversial. And I really agree with all of your comments. I'd just like to add that you can't depend on the political will of this leadership of the state. I mean, look what the legislature did to us this year. I mean, they cut $300 million out, and then they forced a 12th university on us that's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. So you never know what's going to happen. So we got a one-shot opportunity, the way I view it, and we better take advantage of it. We've been asking for this for years. We've gotten some. You better take it now, and I don't see any advantage whether you make it 15 or 14 or 12 or some lower number. I don't know what that does. That shows us, that kind of puts us as politicians, in my opinion,
right,
not as being stewards of trying to save this system and trying to keep it going. So in addition to the legislature, and I think we're doing what they wanted us to do, we got 11 boards of trustees that have asked us to do the right thing. We've got the students of all these universities, 11 universities, asking us to do the right things. And we got the presidents, who are a very, very competent group of presidents in this state who are asking us to do the right thing. So I'm in favor of the motion. If you want me to amend it, I think we're going to have a harder time getting it passed. But I'll amend it if you want.
Call the question.
The question is, I'm sorry. I didn't see any other hands. Are there other hands?
No, I have a...
Okay, I'm sorry. You guys got to... This is not the best side to chair from, by the way.
Here's the question first, Mr. Chairman. I know that he was okay with amending based upon Dick's comments.
Just to have it be 15%, and if you don't want to use the whole 15, fine.
I would oppose
But
that.
I think it's going to make it harder to get a vote here.
You don't second that?
I seconded the original one. I'm not going to accept it.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Okay, if you want to speak, please show me that. Governor Colson.
I'll go to Mr. Chairman.
I have struggled with this tuition issue. I hear and respect the governor's desire to keep costs low for our students and their families, and I think the governor is right to demand efficiencies and prevent unnecessary duplication. But frankly, I think we've been demanding efficiencies, and the presidents have heard that, but didn't need to hear it. They were demanding efficiencies, and so we've been doing that. I believe our universities have been cut significantly while they have simultaneously, for the most part, seen their enrollments grow. So it's been extra hard because they're growing and they're being cut, and quality has suffered. And I think at the end of the day, we got to be worried about quality. I also understand that 4 years of attendance at our universities is just one of the alternatives that the state offers for our children who desire a college education, children and young people. Our college system and our 2+2 alternatives provide a much less expensive pathway to a baccalaureate, so that when we raise tuition at our universities, it does not necessarily follow that we are foreclosing a college degree for our children. This is a constitutionally created board, and so my fiduciary obligation arises from that, and And in the end of the day, I believe tuition increases are appropriate. I'm a little disappointed, to be honest with you, that we're not having a university by university discussion about this. And if my choice is between 0 and 15 and everybody or nothing, I'm probably going to support the motion, and we'll go to the full board and have a university by university discussion on this. And maybe that's the way to tee it up instead of having it here. But I do believe this is important enough that it deserves that type of examination by us. But we have got to distinguish our universities. We've got to make them better, and that's going to take resources. And tuition is just one of those. Is just one of the sources of those resources. So I'm in favor of some increases, and I would like to have a dialogue about it.
Thank you, Governor Colson. Governor Parker.
Yeah, I share the position of the chairman and that the chairman of the board, and that I do feel that it requires some university by university discussion, but I also think it requires a discussion by this board as to whether or not we agree with the direction that the legislature has kind of shifted this whole conversation in. That is, do we agree that it is time for our families to share more of the burden of higher education? And certainly that is the indication that has been sent from the legislature, and that they assumed the 15% increase. But I think constitutionally it becomes a responsibility of this board to say, directionally we agree with that. And then directionally, if we agree with that, to what extent do we agree with it? And I think that's why it is important to pass something out of the committee so the board can be on record and have some dialogue about whether we agree with that position. I also find it, difficult to deal with the idea that I appreciate everything the governor has said, and I appreciate the fact that, families do feel the pressures that are placed upon them when we increase tuition. That I love this slide, and I think it sends a message, but I have a niece who's in our system, and I hear my sister when she says, I've got to send more money, that the record would suggest that she has, but it does put extra pressure, and we kind of have to figure out where it comes from. So as a family that kind of gets caught in that range that's represented here, I do understand some of the pressures, and it's a different message than what I sometimes get from the presidents. And then finally, I think the other mixed message in this for me is that I understand what the governor has said and what he said in his speech, but I also know that when the full budget came before him, that I didn't get the message in the way he treated the budget as much as I'm getting it in the way he dealt with us directly. And so that becomes another part of our discussion to me. It's kind of like, okay, so I understand, Governor Scott, how you're feeling. I understand with some of the other veto measures that you put in place that you really are sensitive to the idea that our families should not have this extra burden. But since that 15% was treated as a part of the full budget by the legislature, I didn't hear it in whatever powers I think that he would have over that budget. So that's why it kind of becomes a mixed bag for me. So as it relates to the particular motion, and I guess let me say one more thing so you kind of can have an idea about how I feel. I feel that some increases are warranted. I'm not completely at 15%, and I feel that we benefit from some individual discussion for each university. And I particularly am concerned about the current motion, in that the current motion as it stands, does not, if we're going to adopt 15% and we feel that that's the direction it should go in, I feel it should be across the board, and that those universities that tried to listen to what was out there and be as responsible as they could be should not be penalized if that's the decision we're going to make as a board. So I guess in order to get it up to a full conversation, I don't have any problem with voting positively for it, but I do think it warrants a university by university, and that if it's going to be across the board, it should be completely across the board.
Madam Ex-Chair, if it is the will of this committee and the acquiescence of the motion makers. I'm not averse to going university by university. It will be up to Governor Temple, Governor Rood. I think Chair Colson has indicated that this afternoon he would do that, even if my motion is a committee motion. Is that what you've told us, Governor Colson?
Well, I don't think I'll have any, I think that's the way, I think that's going to be the will of the board, and then we'll have your committee, our committee, will bring the motion of the committee to the board, and then it'll be subject to discussion.
Let's get it to the board.
Let's get it to the board. And
call the question.
Okay. Well, there we go. The question on the motion has been called. The motion is to approve, on behalf of the Budget and Finance Committee, the requests of each of the universities as made, and as has been reported over the last 2 days. The motion has been seconded. Debates occurred. We will call the question. Minoka, would you please call the roll?
Chair Perez,
Yes.
Co-Chair Kuntz, Vice Chair Kuntz, Governor Beard,
Yes.
Governor Colson,
Yes.
Governor Parker,
Yes.
Governor Rood,
Yes.
Governor Temple,
Yes.
Governor Tripp,
No.
Governor Watley.
Yes.
Motion carries by a vote of 7-2. Okay, we have one final item. As a committee, we have, and it's a brief item, and I want Tim to update the committee on Senate Bill 198, which passed during the session. The bill impacts our state university system's optional retirement program. I know this is somewhat anticlimactic after the last conversation, but Tim is such a spark plug. I know he's going to make it important for us. Tim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it is very important, especially to our university employees that take part in the optional retirement program. Section 121.35 of Florida statutes creates the optional retirement program for the SUS. The Department of Management Services manages that program on behalf of our institutions. The Board of Governors has a role in this process in terms of making recommendations on the types of providers that will provide these services to our employees. Current statute limits the number of providers to no more than 5. Currently, we have ING, Jefferson National, MetLife Investors, TIAA-CREF, and VALIC as our 5 providers. We have about 17,000 employees out of the 60 that we have that participate in the optional retirement program. There's assets of about $3 billion and annual contributions of over $200 million. The contracts for these current providers were put in place many, many years ago, and they will expire in January of 2015. The Senate Bill 198 that passed this session increased the number of providers from 5 to 6. The Department of Management Services has issued a request for a quote to obtain a consultant to help us begin the process of looking at what new providers may bring to the system. A team of DMS folks, university staff, and board staff will be working to select this consultant over the next couple of weeks. But here's where we need the committee and the board's involvement, and I'll outline the timeline. DMS will be sending a letter to Chair Colson here in the next week asking for input from the board on the types of services that we would like to see the providers provide for our employees. We'll have 90 days to prepare our list of needs and get that back to DMS. So the timing works out very well that we can work over this over the summer, meet back with the Budget Committee in September, and give DMS our recommendations by October 1st. So I would recommend that we ask CAFA, which is our university CFOs, to take this initiative on over the summer and then report back to this committee and then the board at our September meeting. So that would be the process to begin identifying what our needs are. Once we've identified those needs, DMS will go out to the street to try to solicit some vendors. Those will come back into the state. We would have the universities, probably once again the CAFA group, to evaluate those proposals, come back to the board probably in March of 2013 with a recommendation on the 6th provider. That sixth provider would actually start in July of 2013. But at the same time that we're adding a sixth provider, we have to start looking at the current 5 providers because their contracts expire. So we'll need to be selecting a completely new set of providers in time for the expiration of the contracts, which is in 2015. So we'll be doing this again, but for 5 providers in probably June of next summer. So that's kind of the outline and the timeline. So really what I'm looking for from the committee, if it's okay, we'll proceed with our CFO group and developing what our needs are and then report back to the committee at our September meeting.
Thanks, Tim. Is there any objection to the process Tim laid out, particularly relying on CAFA, who always does an exceptional job? Okay. Seeing none, Tim, it looks like you've got full authority to move forward. With that, we are, how many? 2 minutes over our allotted time. And anything else for the committee? If not,